I don't have anything else to say other than from the Archdiocese of Chicago, please welcome Father Jim Hyde. Father.
I guess one word you can say, I'm a troublemaker. That's a holy troublemaker. Or my seven sisters have a lot of words for me, but I just hope to pass the test today, and within the short amount of time we have to get a couple points across. And I'm just so delighted, and I thank Greg for the opportunity to talk something dear to my heart, and that is something on Serra and some connection, and that is his dear friend who was martyred. Who died in San Diego. And so we were talking, throwing out some ideas, and we decided on, because as of late in the church, and I think the Cardinal addressed it very well, not only that one French priest he mentioned, Saint Pierre, who was killed in that island, on that island, but also just, this is the past century of martyrs, where many of our faithful, not only lay faithful, have perished, but priests and religious. And so this is a real current topic. So what I want to do is talk about the example of the Padre Luis Yaum, who was born and raised not too far from Father Serra, and he died in 1775. And those of us going on the pilgrimage, our last destination point is the mission there in beautiful San Diego, where he's buried. He's interred there, right there, his resting place. And I came across a letter, Father Serra thanking the friars for giving him proper burial. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about him and what happened, the impact, and then put it in the larger context within the short time we have. The 3 B's of preaching are be short, be sweet, be gone. So I'm going to just move it along, and I follow in the wake of just so many great, the ones I've heard. The talks have been tremendous, very inspirational for me. And there's no question, themes that I've picked up, I'll try to intersperse in my talk today. So, amar a Dios, hijos. Those are the last words of dear Father Luis Yaum, who was born in St. Joan, in the town right next to Father Serra. So as he was being killed, those were the words he said, amar a Dios hijos, which translated as love God, children. And those were the last words of this holy priest. So we think, Serra, siempre adelante, move ahead, with the indomitable spirit, that kept on going. And if he had more than a few lifetimes, he would have ended up in the Orient and who knows where else. Father Serra would have kept on going to Africa. But now we have another friar. Of the 130 Fernandinos, they were trained in Mexico City, and there they left for Mexico City, and they went up the coast. And so Father Luis Yaum is one. And I crossed by his church. Our dear friends in Mallorca, in Petra, that run the museum of Father Serra, they were driving me in that area, and we went to Father Luis Yaum's village, and I saw the monument. So we'll get into this now a little bit. Ready to go, everybody? Ready to undertake a wonderful journey? So opening setting, I want to take you through the San Diego mission, Father Luis a little bit, the Indians who killed him, influences on Father Junipero Serra. Why was he so forgiving? Was he prepared for such a trauma? Did he show vengeance, or how did he react? Well, I'll kind of go through that a little bit, and then I'll kind of talk about some of the martyrs of today, and then we'll kind of wrap it up in a short time. So the San Diego mission established 1769, and so we have San Diego, and then we have Monterey, right, and everything filled in between. So they knew the friars. I mean, this land in the 1600s, it started to be the Spanish came up and down, but it wasn't until 1769. And then he was killed in 1775, so right before our Declaration of Independence, right? So as George Washington and the founding fathers and mothers were doing what they were doing on the East Coast, Father Luis in 1775. Here's the mission, a very old picture, maybe one of the original drawings. The Indian lands were right there. Does everybody see that okay? So the Kumeyaay Indians, I don't know a lot about them, but they were the Indian tribe there. And there's no question that there's an Indian renaissance going on, a native renaissance. We have in many of our dioceses as an outreach, and we're connecting with them more and more. And so this was the tribe that was a part, they were the Indians, and here's an original picture of how they looked in the day. So some images of that Indian band, okay, and they're dwelling, not a teepee, but kind of like some of the Potawatomi huts up in the Midwest. So that's how they lived. Okay, facts of the case. On the dark night in 1775, a horde of Indians attacked the mission, burned the buildings, killed 3 Spaniards, including Father Luis Yaum, first martyr of Alta California. The raid delayed the founding of other missions until more troops were available, but because it failed, it discouraged the Indians from trying to expel the foreigners. He was born in 1740 in the village of St. Joan, Mallorca, and studied at San Bernardino Convent School. That was the same school that Father Serra studied in his hometown. He conducted his theological studies, like Serra, in Palma. He was ordained in 1764, a little after Serra. 1770, he began his training at the College of San Fernando in Mexico City, where he was conditioned in privation, fatigue, mortification, and penance. So that was a real rigorous training that the missionaries got there in Mexico City. Unlike, since we were spoiled, my generation of priests, we need you, they gave us a lot of perks, but no, these guys knew that they were going to suffer. So it was a much more rigorous training and preparation, and he was murdered in 1775. Here's a picture of Father Luis Yaum. Has anybody heard of him at all? Okay, so a few have. And so there's more to Serra than Serra. This is what I always say. As we go deeper down, my dear friends, since the canonization, some of us were there with the Holy Father in Washington. That's just, that's a starting point. That now it's up to us to go deeper down into the life of Serra. And we have precedents, many others before us. What led to the canonization? A lot of research. But now it's a new beginning after the canonization. We kind of make the connections, and see how all this kind of came together to create the mission. As we want to be mission disciples today, the Holy Father in his first encyclical, in the joy of the gospel, we're to have a joy and a spirit to proclaim the gospel in season and out of season, ever ancient, ever new, as Cardinal Collins said. So this is for us today. So we learn from this. The martyrdom of Father Luis, they grabbed him, then they beat him to death, to the pulp. They really, brutalized him. But that's what he said. He said, Amar a Dios hijos, still, love God, my children. And what a great witness, and what a great testimony. The word martyr comes from, there's a Latin word and a Greek word, so the original languages, but basically it means one who bears testimony to faith. So one who bears testimony. I give a testimony of my dear faith, and I'm willing to suffer death even. So early on in the church, there's a very clear, respect for martyrs, the Roman martyrs, those who died around Christ, the apostles, okay? Bear a place of Fray Luis Yaum, and this is the cross that in San Diego that some of us will get to, and so there is the resting place. Now I got over to the mission of Santa Barbara before I came, and I came across Father Geiger, who was the started the archives in the library at Santa Barbara. He died in 1979. He is one of the definitive authors of Father Serra. Well, there's a tribute to him on his 70th birthday I found, and I stayed there at Santa Barbara to do some research, and I found the letter, and that's where really the narrative is. Father Geiger went to Mexico. I found his pictures from the 1940s and 50s, okay? He did a lot of research in Mexico City, but he also found a lot of documents, you see? And he took pictures of them and it's got under catalog and everything. Well, I found some of the words of Father Serra about this, okay? A letter addressed to, and I don't have it on my PowerPoint, But this is a letter to Father Firmin Francisco de Lasaun in 1778, so 3 years later. He writes, "Sincerest thanks to your reverence and to Father Juan for the transfer of the remains of my dear deceased Father Luis, okay, to your mission, so that they may await the resurrection of the flesh, where for God our Lord they gave up the spirit. May he rest and be in peace in heaven, and may his remains among his beloved Indians." Okay, so they weren't like these priests. We've been hearing, that we got to love people, we got to be inviting, and so he loved them. He wanted to serve them. "Although they do not esteem him either through ingratitude, through ignorance, herein let the last letter of your reverence be answered." So, Father Serra, I came across a letter in the archives. There are over 8,000 documents that Father Geiger, and we should do a biography on him. I have pictures of him now, Father Geiger, this great Franciscan on a motorcycle in the 1920s. And that'll be a book in the future, okay? So not only do we have Serra, but we have Father Geiger. Just preaching the gospel, and Father Geiger wanting to highlight the story. And now we have access to these wonderful, wonderful letters. To show Serra's attitude after Father Yaum was beaten to death by rocks by this indigenous band who were very angry and were not kind of easily, they weren't friendly, they were hostile, they opposed the mission, and it took them a while for them to come around. But this is what Father Serra said, and it's kind of the linchpin of my point today. "I'm glad that the murderers of the Father have surrendered." Okay, so justice be done, as also the other fugitives who were missing since the uprising. So this could have ended the mission in 1775, but siempre adelante, always ahead, okay? "This reclaiming of the erring sheep, they did wrong, and bringing them back to the fold of the Good Shepherd," okay, "is a great consolation. And I, although so lukewarm within me, appreciate it, at least recalling the joy of the angels in heaven." So you don't hear in Serra here vengeance or retaliation. He knew that the blood of Father Luis Yaum, the first martyr of California, would go into the soil. Didn't the Cardinal mention St. Irenaeus today? The blood of the martyrs is the seed by which the faith grows, you see? So what an example of forgiveness. He had already, and I've been passing out these holy cards of Father Serra, which I will bring to the San Francisco March for Life, the Walk for Life. He wrote in 1773 the Ley Representación, which is the Declaration of Human Rights in California. Monsignor Weber, another historian who always worked with Father Geiger, said that, Father Serra left Monterey, went all the way down to Mexico City to protect the Indians, to create this charter of human rights for them. So that was in 1773. And 1775, Father Luis is killed. 1778, we get this letter, "Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do." Wow. And so I always regard, during the canonization, I just thought that, wait a second, Serra, he might have been paternal, tough Spaniard, but he was loving, forgiving. He cared about the Indians just as much as Father Luis Yaum did, right? And so we should honor him, Serrans. Maybe, someone will take up his cause for canonization too. Here is the monument in his hometown, Sant Joan, Mallorca, nearby Petra. Right outside the church, there is a big stone that says, he was born, I guess, those are his birthdays, maybe 1728 to 1775. So the church in Mallorca recognizes Father Luis Yaum. And in the church, there is a beautiful portrait, and they sent it to me, but I wasn't able to put it on to this PowerPoint. So the Balearic Island, what might have been some of the influences of Father Serra that he had the capacity to forgive? Let's go back to Mallorca. Who's been to Mallorca with the 300? A number of us. So let's kind of go back. And those Serrans who haven't, one day, let's make a trip, okay? Let's plan another. I like going on trips, so we'll plan. So Convento of San Francisco Palma. So this is where Father Serra, and this is where Father Luis Yaum studied, in the big city. all right, where the ships kind of left, right by the cathedral. And this is where Serra studied Duns Scotus philosophy. He studied there, and he trained, he taught there. Well, this is where Father Luis would have studied too. It's the big city, right? Like our big theologate at Mundelein or Kendrick or whatever. Now, there's a statue of Serra there in front of the convento. Some of us remember that when we met with the Bishop of Mallorca, and one of the archbishops of the Vatican came for his 300th birthday. You know, we got to that convento, and Father Joe Cherbo, we had a mass there in the back, and there's just a lot of artifacts and such. Well, one of the big influences, I think, is Raymond Yule. He was a friar in Palma, and he's just featured throughout. Raymond Yule, if you know a little bit about him, he was born in 1232 in Palma and died a martyr in 1315 in Tunis. He was a mathematician, philosopher, a logician. In his autobiography, Vita help me with my Latin, somebody, Coetania, he mentions a vision he had to die in the service of God. So Raymond Yule was a friar. He hadn't been married. He became a third order, sort of. He was a teacher. He was the father of the Catalan language. He's born in 1232 and he died in 315. He wanted to go to like St. Francis, to the Orient, to be willing to be put to death, to spread the faith, because he had a vision to die in the service of God. His remains are in the chapel in the Convento de San Francisco in Palma, Mallorca, where Serra would have taught, and Father Luis Yaum also would have studied and taught. And there is, if you remember, some of you, there is his tomb. He is a key figure in the medieval period, Raymond Yule. So he's featured in Mallorca as a big influence that undoubtedly Serra and the others would have been inspired by his example. So there's a dedication to him. There's a university named after him. And, so that's a big figure. He just had his 700th anniversary of something or another, and of the Catalan language. So moving back now from that big town, it's like going, big town Chicago, and I'm going to take off in the car and go into someplace in a couple hours, go into the countryside, and there's a lot of gems throughout the countryside, beautiful things that you discover. Oh, there you go. It's San Bernardino in Petra. This is where Serra was born and where he was raised, and also Father Luis Yaum would have joined him in studies. Now, in that church, I grabbed a picture of this. There's the martyrdom of Raymond Yule in that chapel, okay? Here lies the depiction of the artistic rendition of the martyrdom of Raymond Yule in Tunisia in 1315. Wow. So in that church, as they were boys growing up, praying, witnessing, here's a friar from, this place, the crossroads of civilization between Africa and Spain, the Balearic Islands. They would have seen this Raymond Yule figure, so well respected that he put his actions, into gear. He was willing to travel and risk his life, and that's what happened to him. He was beat up pretty badly. He died, I guess, on his way back. Raymond Yule. So he would have absorbed that that's what part of the consequence of our faith is. Oh, okay, so the Serrans, here we are in Petra, okay? So some of our people, when we had our 300th anniversary, we all came to the museum. So we Serrans know about this wonderful place of the world, don't we? We've gone there already. We've had wonderful meals. We've conviviencia. We celebrated. We know about this history. Okay, so now onward to New Spain. Off they go. This is the Colegio de San Fernando in Mexico City. So this is the beginning of California. And they would have learned, as soon as they got to the New World, all that was transplanted from the Mallorca Islands. It was into Mexico, and then this is the launching pad into California, Alta California. And then they would have learned the Indian languages, and they would have learned about mortification and sacrifice. Okay, so what's current today is that we have Serra in this holy card in 1773. He cares about human rights. He cares about the indigenous. I use that in my work today in pro-life, the dignity of the human person. That all of us, just what Cardinal Collins was talking about, People have dignity and human rights, and we stand for that. So it's worth willing to sacrifice for, you know? That was the spirit of Serra and Father Luis Yaum. Okay, biblical antecedents. Jesus himself was crucified, died, and was resurrected. Jesus said at his crucifixion, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Luke 23:34. Our Lord himself. Go to the Holy Land, to the Holy Sepulchre, okay? So our faith is grounded. This just didn't come out of nowhere, a piety that just suffer for the sake of suffering. No, the Lord himself in the Holy Sepulchre. Okay, this was consecrated in 335. So pilgrims in Jerusalem get to see where Jesus Christ was crucified and Calvary itself. He would have seen that. Jesus overcomes death. You know, you go to the Holy Land, you see all this, it's all biblical. This is the Idical, where Jesus Christ himself was buried for a time. He overcame death. He was in the tomb, and he overcame death. Death has no power over him. So a friend of mine, her son was just beaten to death. Okay? He was just beaten to death and burned and brutalized. Okay? And I'm trying to help her deal with that in a gang situation. We had a boy in Chicago, a 10-year-old, like Emmett Till, put into a canister, beaten and burned to death. One of our kids. So the idea of the tomb, really, in this culture of death, these stories will help people overcome this, because our loved martyrs have gone through this, and some of us are suffering through this. So the first Christians to suffer the same fate of our Lord, the first martyr, St. Stephen, the martyrdom of Stephen, right? Stephen was born in AD 35, and he was the first martyr. He was killed in 34. He was a Jerusalem deacon and aroused hatred by his preaching. So where's Deacon Bob? We weren't martyred last night for our drinking, but that's another thing. Okay. So thankfully, they were going to kick us out after a little vino, right? So the deacons sometimes have it tough. Okay, they take it from us priests a lot of times, and they put up with us. So it's a kind of not a bloody martyrdom, but kind of a white martyrdom. You have to put up with our nonsense. During his martyrdom, Stephen looked up and cried, "Look, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." He said that the recently executed Jesus was standing by the side of God. Acts 7:54. The people from the crowd who threw the first stones laid their coats down so as to be able to do this at the feet of the young man named Saul. So Saul was there, who became Paul. Stephen prayed that the Lord would receive his spirit and his killers be forgiven, sank to his knees and fell asleep. And Saul was there, of course, and approved the killing before his conversion. So early Christians, the first Christian in Acts of the Apostles. Doesn't this sound like Monsignor Shea's talk a little bit? Apostolic. He said, read the Acts of the Apostles. Okay, I guess Father Luis Yaum and Father Serra did the same. You know, this is apostolic, and nobody's going to look for martyrdom. I mean, I'd rather play golf and relax a little sometimes, on the off hours. But if you got to go, you got to go. I guess someone's going to go after you. So Stephen's gate in Jerusalem, where the Via Dolorosa begins, named in honor of Saint Stephen, who died nearby. So in Jerusalem, then there is this gate that highlights the Via Dolorosa. So the idea of martyrdom and Via Dolorosa, Jesus was put to death. He overcame death. In the Americas, it just didn't happen in the 1700s, 18th century. The continent has been through a lot of bloodshed, especially in Mexico. Father Serra's Nueva Mexico, or Nueva Spain, New Spain, became Mexico. And in the 20s and 30s, we have the Cristiada period. 1 million Mexicans died from that civil war, if you will. But many of the cristeros died, hundreds of priests and laity. And if you see the movie For Greater Glory, has anybody seen that movie? That highlights that period of time. So even today in Mexico, it's more dangerous to be a priest in Mexico than any else in the world, which is tough to understand and appreciate. So I got up to the Cristo Rey Shrine in Leon, okay? Pope Benedict was there. And I brought, leave it up to me, I brought the Matka Boża. Does everybody see that icon there? That's the mother of Poland, okay? I'll tell you that story at a later time, okay? But there they are with the Indian Mexicans. Took 7 years to paint, Our Lady of Czestochowa. She's going to end up in Russia, but I took her over the border. I think I created a little revolution at the diocese, but I brought her over, and there I met all the Indian tribes, okay? But there is Cristo Rey. Viva Cristo Rey! Viva Cristo Rey! Now, Father Luis Yaum, he wouldn't have maybe said that grita or shout, but who knows? These martyrs of Mexico in the 20s, some of them read these stories of the martyrs of Alta California. Okay, so there they are. They're gonna, with their accordion, they're going to the shrine. I'm dancing along with them. Okay, and there they are. Viva Cristo Rey. The life of Father. Who was the key who said that Viva Cristo Rey? It was Father Miguel Pro. Okay, not too far from San Fernandino, where Father Serra came from Spain to Mexico City, in that place, that apostolic college, and the Pope is saying to us, go back to study this sense of mission history. Father Miguel Pro, out of all the Cristeros, is best known because he was, there's a museum there in Mexico City at the parish of Sagrada Familia, and there are his remains, okay? So he was put to death in 1927, and in a very iconic picture, they put him to death and his hands raised, Viva Cristo Rey, okay? So our continent is really a continent full of martyrs. Father Miguel was fun. 1891 he was born. He traveled in U.S., Spain, Nicaragua, Belgium. He dressed up as a mechanic to bring the Eucharist to people who were homebound. He was a real card. He was a real character, but he brought the faith to people. And so Father Miguel, in light of this, in our continent, okay? The universal call to holiness, to martyrs, in a particular place in Rome, our archdiocese runs it, the Basilica of San Bartolomeo al Isola. It's dedicated to St. Bartholomew. Okay, so here we go to the larger picture. We have talked about what happened in San Diego. Some of us will go to this holy place and we'll offer prayers. And we'll now honor Father Luis Yaum like never before. He's come alive to our Serrans. And we see his connection with Father Serra in Mallorca and in Mexico City. But where we see the biblical antecedents. Jesus went through this, St. Stephen. So this is part and parcel of our faith. Now what do we do with it? In the church in Rome at Bartolomeo, we have a shrine there on the Tiber, and this is the church. The Holy Roman Emperor Otto III established the church on the Tiber Island in Rome in 998. It contains the relics of Bartolomeo, okay? So this is a shrine now, and John Paul II has been there, and Pope Francis. It is a place where we recognize what is happening, especially today. We remember what Cardinal said today, in the Middle East, in Africa, those Nigerians, that bride who was put to death for being a Catholic, those 11 others in Nigeria recently, those men, 4 of our seminarians have been, this is something we can no longer just look the other way. China, this site in Rome is so important universally for the whole church, okay? Who was St. Bart? Like St. Stephen, first century apostle and martyr, okay? Bartolomeo was born in Cana, Galilee, was killed in Armenia. His feast in the Latin church is August 24th. He is said to have preached in India. His relics are at the church on the Tiber Island in Rome. Icon of the Martyrs, presented to the Church of St. Bartolomeo in Rome on the Tiber by John Paul II. So already we have in our iconography, I know you can't see it too well, but we have below here, I guess there are examples of the death camps, the horrific slaughter of the last century, the death camps, the gulags, the terrible things that have happened. And so this is the last century in particular has been just a real difficult. The icon depicts a scene from the book of Revelation. There before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. Revelation 7:9. So Some people say this is the book, this is the apocalyptic time because of this suffering, right? So in the church, there's, and I'm going to wrap this up in about 10 minutes, the martyrs of the Nazi regime, 1930s and 1940s, okay? So here we go. There's Father Jim, Serra in Berlin. Do we have a Serra Club in Berlin? Okay, well, I just started one. Greg, I just wanted to let you know. I was at the Brandenburg Gate, and I thought, here I am, Serra, making the rounds. Whether we like it or not, I would have made my way around the place. So there's the Brandenburg Gate. So I ended up in Berlin because we got to re-evangelize. There's only a couple of Catholic churches in Berlin, and that's a disgrace. We've got to change that narrative. So I was in Berlin, okay. So I happened to go over to, what connection am I making? Operation Valkyrie, okay? Von Stauffenberg. You seen the movie Operation Valkyrie? Okay, it's worthwhile. Well, it's a World War II film. It's against the Nazi regime. Von Stauffenberg was Catholic to the core. He might not have been a missionary. He might not have been a priest. He was a soldier, but he opposed evil, and he opposed the regime. He was Catholic to the core. He really was a tremendous man. So he opposed what was going on. He was at the Binder Block, okay? This is the military headquarters of the Third Reich in Germany. This is his office. I was like, whoa, I got into his office where he was planning all this. I told you I was a troublemaker schemer, but there I was in the office. This is where he was planning, okay? Now, he was put to death there, and in the movie you'll see that. Now, not only he was executed, but many, thousands of the German resistance were put to death, many of them being Christian. Father Delpt, Jesuit, Father Bernard from St. Hedwig's down the block in Berlin. Right there, there's an incredible memorial there at the Binder Block, right there in Berlin today, to give witness to people who stood up against evil and paid a price. This is difficult because I got then to Platzensee prison, execution. They were executed there. Some of them were executed on the site of the headquarters, others in a prison. I just happened to be walking through Berlin, and I saw Platzensee, and I said, I have to go. It was a moment of darkness. It's like a concentration camp because beautiful, innocent people were killed there, okay? Many members of our faith. And there's the monument, okay? So I'll go back. There's the monument, okay? So they've sanitized it a little bit. But these are dark things. Like the killing of Father Luis Jaum was a dark thing, a tragedy in history, that the tribe couldn't really get to know his heart. They were fearful. They mistrusted this wonderful priest who wanted to serve them, and so they committed violence. Isn't violence committed many times because of fear, mistrust? It escalates. The same thing here is that there's a darkness there because of mistrust, hatred for the truth, for the light, for our faith. And so I got to Platzensee prison, and there it was in the execution. And finally, everything is in history. Konrad Adenauer, the German chancellor, Catholic, he also was persecuted, went back to give dignity to what had happened. Some of the martyrs there. There was a Father Gopp, he died. There were a lot of pictures of these martyrs, okay? Now remember, Father Gopp was 1897, 1943. He was Austrian, World War I veteran, socialist turned Marianist priest. He was put to death in 1943 there. One of many thousands. I just bring this up, okay? There's an evangelical preacher also there. So all this is going on in our world today. Now we go to the Orient quickly. In the Orient, in China, thousands are being persecuted right now, some put to death for the faith, okay? So there's a Franciscan friar I have in this picture. Father Serra would have gone to the Orient had he had a chance, okay? But some of his brothers did, okay? So Asian martyrs, onward to Serra Gathering. I was going to Belgium, wasn't I? Remember Belgium? Or to Melbourne? And there on the way to Melbourne, I stopped in at the Philippines, okay? And I read a little, there's Stephen, joyful Serrans in Melbourne, Australia, okay? Our Serrans have taken, we're global. We see all this around us, all this incredible. It took me to the Orient. You see, before I went to Melbourne, I went to the Chinese Museum in Manila. So there's today we also recognize the Asian martyrs, okay? Okay, so there's a lot of this history in our museums, in our churches that are highlighted. In a place called Binondo Church in Manila, San Lorenzo Ruiz was killed in, I think it was in Japan, and I visited that church. Thanks to the Serrans, on my way to Melbourne, and my dear friends, I got to visit and take note of that. So there's a little picture of him, St. Lawrence Ruiz. And there's Denny. So after that, all that heavy-duty stuff, just normal guys, let's go out and have a little beer and relax a little bit, okay? Because this is heavy stuff, okay? So there's a lot going on here in the church today. We are back to apostolic tradition, one way or another, as we've heard in the other talks before us, Monsignor Shea and the Cardinal and those things. And we have before us these realities. And we as Serrans then seen the sacrifice, not only of Father Serra, but of the first martyr of Alta California, this Padre Luis. And I hope to learn a little bit more about him. God willing, I can go deeper down into the research to find more details in time. But it's just one martyr, one individual. In our landscape in America, we can contribute to the church. Maybe in Rome, we go to St. Bartholomew's and say, listen, we have also these Franciscan martyrs, these martyrs of California. And we'd like to offer their example too, to this larger discussion of martyrdom. So brothers and sisters, in hindsight and just in conclusion, there's a rich theology here. And let's go, some of us will go, but all of us will be one way or another in spirit. We'll go to San Diego. We'll visit Padre Luis with a little better understanding of where this all fits in the larger history of the church. So thank you so much for your attentive,